Who wants to be a doctor? You guys want to be a doctor? Where do you want to study? Where do you want to study? Where do you want to study? So, when you guys remember what I said, how drugs are international, just give me a call, and I'll be happy to reply. Thank you.
Honourable Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I am the fourth speaker of the opposition to the motion. For almost 50 years, people had to live with the constant fear of an actual war breaking out between powers in the East and West during the Cold War, and there is still evidence of both Cold War alliances present today. Many Eastern countries still enjoy NATO, such as Russia and China, and NATO's expansion efforts are often seen by Moscow leaders as a continuation of a Cold War attempt to surround and isolate Russia. Following the recent Ukrainian revolution and Russia's annexation of Crimea, tensions now resurfaced between NATO and countries in the East. Russia rejected the legitimacy of the interim Ukrainian government and has also accused the US and the EU of funding and directing the revolution. Over the past few months, as tension and violence escalated in Ukraine, many surrounding countries, such as Poland, have requested increased military support from NATO and the US. In response, on 16th of April, ships were deployed in the Baltic and Mediterranean Sea, and there were more military exercises in Eastern Europe. Despite the measures being limited so as to not look like aggression, they were nevertheless there. On 1st of April, NATO suspended all military and civilian cooperation with Russia, and Russian diplomatic access to NATO headquarters was restricted. Both Russia and China still agree on many issues today, such as Moscow sending troops into Ukraine, and they both vetoed a draft UN resolution calling for the crisis in Syria to be referred to the International Criminal Court. In 2001, both countries signed a treaty of good neighborliness and friendly cooperation. It is the 20th strategic treaty for peaceful relations, economic cooperation, as well as diplomatic and geopolitical alliance between the two countries. Even recently, Russia's Gazprom signed a deal worth about $40 billion with China to provide natural gas for 30 years. This will only strengthen the relationship between the Eastern superpowers. This deal comes as a result of relations soaring between the US and EU because of the crisis in Ukraine. Whilst the Western countries have banded together to create NATO, many Eastern countries have come together to form the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a Eurasian political, economic, military organization which was founded in 2001 in Shanghai by the leaders of China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. The main goals of the SCO are the strengthening mutual confidence and good neighborly relations among the member countries. The organization is expected to counter the growing influence of the United States military presence in Central Asia. Most analysts characterize present Chinese-American relations as being complex. Relations between China and the United States have been generally stable with some periods of tension. One worrying trend is that while the US and China are increasingly interdependent, trust between the two countries has shrunk. The countries have found disagreement on a wide range of issues over recent months. These include US allegations of Chinese military officers hacking US companies' data, growing territorial disputes between China and its neighbors, and political tensions in Hong Kong where tens of thousands of people participated in a massive pro-democracy protest on July 1st. The situation was enough to prompt former US Treasury Investor David Dollar to tell the Wall Street Journal that there seems to be a downward spiral in the relationship between the US and China. The growing strains in relations between Eastern and Western countries and the special relationship formed between Russia and China only emphasizes how divided the world really is between East and West. The fact that the events that I have mentioned are very recent shows that the terms Eastern and Western are still valid in present-day international relations.
As the final speech for the proposition, I would like to conclude our argument by somewhat summarizing all of them. So, geographically, Africa, I noticed they didn't say it that often. But what I didn't say was South America. I don't remember hearing much about South America. Where are they? Are they just a new term? Are they Southern? No longer Eastern or Western? These are pretty arbitrary points. You heard, as Sam said, Bosnian and Yugoslavian people. They don't know. You can't rule the country as either Eastern or Western. So where is this line? Does it go through the middle of the country? And NATO, for example, it was strategic defense between what they thought was going to be another power. Also, in case of, they would have done a similar thing with Germany, for example, prior to World War II. The world is not binary. There's no black and white. Eastern and Western are no longer appropriate. Religions are becoming more accepting. Hinduism was originally very conservative, but now as we go to a more liberal times, they're more accepting of new converts. As we said, there are going to be 3 billion Christians by 2050, but only 1/5 of white. Predominantly, these Western nations are mostly white. I mean, Europe, for example, is considered to be a white nation, yet only 1/5 of the Christians are going to be white, which is a Western religion. I don't quite see how that works. Lagoon was emphasizing food. Pasta is really Chinese, but it's Italian. McDonald's, for example, serve burgers across the world. International travelers recognize this, going to different ones. And so it's a singular, it's a bland, it's not really indicating the significance of each culture. The opposition kept trying to unify the cultures together, saying that, oh, their foods are very similar. I don't go to an Eastern restaurant. I don't go to a Western restaurant. I don't know of one. I would if I could. I mean, I can go to a Thai restaurant, I can go to a Japanese, Indonesian, but I can't go to an Eastern restaurant. And war. I mean, we all fight the same kinds of war. Experiencing the same difficulties. Historically, in the past, the Eastern nations fight wars very similar to the Western nations. I fail to see how wars fall under the categories of Eastern and Western. Yes, you have your Eastern and Western fronts, but in the end, they're both the same war. Now, economically, you have the North and South, a much more appropriate term to define, which is used by many global economists. Why? It makes sense. Most of the wealth is located in the North, and the more economically developed and less economically developed, for the most part, follow these trends. There are exceptions, like Australia in the South is more economically developed. A lot of Eastern European nations, less economically developed. Languages, for example, are a great embodiment of the culture. But they were saying, yes, a lot of these Western nations have the same alphabet. But if you take a look at German and compare it to Latin or ancient Greek, Greece is part of the Western nation, right? They have their own alphabet. Even though Greece is considered a Western nation, it has its own independent alphabet, and therefore the East and the West are no longer appropriate terms because of these. It's much more weighted to the region, not the geographical location.
Right, I noticed that both. Oh, there's one more. Final speaker from the opposition.
Honorable Chair, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alistair, and I'm the fifth and final speaker for the opposition. I will first refute some points made by the opposition. Our opposition. Okay, firstly, Max, you said that Australia was an undefined region, but Australia and New Zealand are Commonwealth countries and are fundamentally Western. A large portion of the population are British immigrants. They're also both.
Are Australia and New Zealand not geographically in the Eastern Hemisphere?
Well, nevertheless, if they're in the Eastern Hemisphere, it's not restricted to that area. And also, they're also members of NATO, which proves that they're part of the Western side. Okay, what's the information?
fell to the USSR, which is part of Russia. So that would make them Eastern. Yet many of these nations are now part of NATO.
Okay, well, regardless of whether the countries were Eastern, regardless of whether the countries were Eastern in the past, if they're today fundamentally Western, it only proves that the names Western and Eastern are evolving to fit the modern use. So therefore, they are still appropriate classifications in international relations. Okay, so third culture countries, such as many of those in Africa, cannot be defined as East or West. They don't have stable governments, so they cannot take sides in the Eastern and the Western part of the argument. Latin America, as you also questioned us on, is a conflicted continent as they have their own culture and were separated for quite some time, but this also conflicts with the colonial ideology brought in by the West. There was also a period when the Russians were the communists of Cuba, and this almost spread to the rest of South America.
You just stated that both Africa and South America are undivided and we cannot define them as Eastern and Western, but does that not support our argument that the terms Eastern and Western are no longer applicable in international relations?
Okay, I will repeat what Andy said.
Can I give a point of information to a point of information? I'd just like to state again in my introduction that I'd like to clarify the motion, as the motion does not specify that the terms Eastern and Western are the sole terms used to illustrate modern international affairs. However, two of the many used to illustrate the modern world today. Thank you.
Well, I think that this must be left for rebuttal. Yeah, later.
Okay, so the House doesn't state that Eastern and Western are the only terms in the world. That's what we're trying to say. So Middle East could be its own area in the world with its own ideology. Okay, Aaron, you said that the religions are all the same because they have similar roots. Now, they may have had similar backgrounds, but there are a vast number of differences between them today. If all religions were so similar, then why do we see constant war raging over the religions all over the world today? So that's unexplained. Now, okay, Abun.
Point of information. Does the speaker not agree that these wars fought by religion against religion are only regarding the religions and their opposing arguments, whereas they're irrelevant to the argument Eastern and Western?
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that the religions are fundamentally different because some of the religions are Eastern, whereas some of them are Western. You can see that these religions are fundamentally different when you look at international flashpoints. These refer to areas of conflict between two different value systems. In this case, flashpoints are referring to Eastern and Western. One example of this is in the Ukraine, as my fellow debatee mentioned before. There's an extreme amount of political tension here because we see two opposing lifestyles coming into contact in an indeterminate region. Now there is in Turkey.
About the Russian invasion of Georgia, which is generally considered an Eastern nation.
Well, I would not consider, what did you say, Jordan?
Georgia.
Okay. I would not consider Georgia Eastern. But that's personally my opinion. We do not state that Georgia was an Eastern nation. So that's just my take on it. And again, in Turkey, where movements to join the EU were met with strong resistance because the population is split into between the ideologies of Western and Eastern. Okay, so coming back, I'd just like to state that the fact that you do not eat pasta on a regular basis, and in fact eat rice, and I eat pasta almost every day of the week, highlights the culinary difference between the East and the West. It doesn't really matter where pasta came from, but it matters that I eat it every single day and you don't eat it ever. Okay, also...
Does the speaker not agree that the point you just raised on food and culture between different areas of the world is irrelevant to international relations?
Well, I'm only refuting the point which you made, in fact, in the first place. So you're the ones who brought up culinary issues, so I guess you're also off the motion. But we can move on to that.
Okay, I think there's one more, but the thing is we need to wait until he's finished his speech.
Okay, I'm going to touch on the McDonald's issue, which also has been brought up. I live in Switzerland, and if you look on the packaging, the ingredients are all Swiss-made, every single one. The beef is Swiss-made, and the lettuce is Swiss-made. You also notice that there are much smaller portions in Switzerland, as people, I guess, don't eat as much as they would in maybe America. And believe me, I noticed that they're smaller portions because they are seriously small. So this highlights that there is a fundamental difference between the food, even in McDonald's, an international corporation, between the East and the West. Okay, Sam, I'm going to refute some points. Okay, some medicines are universal, but Asia, as we already stated, primarily uses homeopathic medicine far more frequently than Westerners. And also, when you said something about a Japanese medicine. I'm not sure what that was, but I didn't know that, and it kind of proves that it's not a global product. Can we have a point of view?
No, you guys want to finish. You want to finish?
Yeah, I'll just do my speech. So to conclude, although there may be some exceptions in the East-West classification, the similarities vastly outweigh the conflicting arguments. As mentioned by my debating colleagues, the similarities can be seen in basically every part of society: culture, food, economics, geography, history, politics, the list is endless. From what our group has presented, I think that you would all come to the rational conclusion that the terms East and West are still very much relevant in international politics. Thank you.
Well, that brings to an end the proposition on which to speak today. Reminded to quote Hamlet, he says, "Oh, he says, 'tis no sweet when two crafts in one line do rage, beginning to join battle, I think." Can we please just hear it one more time? That was amazing. What an amazing range of discovery. What an amazing scope we've got for this event tonight. Thank you all so much. Can we hear it one more time for the proposition? One more time, please, for Andy, for Hannah.
Right, yes, thank you very much. And I agree, I think that was an amazing range there. You've got history, you've got economics, you've got politics, geography, and this just goes on. Just goes on. Right, okay. Now I've noticed both sides have been itching to get their rebuttals in. Okay, so we're going to have an open session of rebuttals where individual members of the team, if you have questions, burning questions or refutations, this is the time to refute the arguments from the other side. Okay, so we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, have a think, and then we'll ask the first person to come up and do their rebuttals. Okay, after that we will open the floor to the audience.